What is up, Aztec fans? With the season approaching quickly, I thought I would take some time and do a couple videos about some of the advanced stats and analytics that I'm going to be tracking and providing for everybody to use. If you've ever seen any of my stuff, or if you've never seen any of it, and you look at it and you're confused, this is the place to come to see what you're looking at and understand how to use it properly. With all that being said, let's get to it. The first sheet is my stats and schemes sheet for this season. You'll notice that everything I provide is in the form of Google Sheets. I do this because it's just an easy way, a simple way to put in all the data that I want and then be able to manipulate it really easily. The first page on my Google Sheet is the projected depth chart. This sheet isn't going to be super useful once the season starts, but you'll notice the first thing when you click on it that shows up is the roster. So I have all the active players for this season. If a player is redshirting, they aren't here, so Malachi Flynn isn't on it. I have their numbers, their heights, the wingspan, if I could find it. I only was able to find a couple wingspans, but if anybody knows where to find them, or if anybody knows any that aren't on here, please let me know. I'd love to add it. Their weights, their year that they're in, as well as the position that they play, kind of roughly. All these things are subject to change, and they're not set in stone. If I have Jalen McDaniels listed as a power forward slash center here, but I wouldn't be surprised if he plays small forward ever, if, assuming his shot is better like everybody is expecting it to be. So there's the roster. Over here, I have the projected depth chart. I've taken some screen grabs of this and put it on Twitter as I've updated it and things like that. Once again, this isn't super useful once the season starts. And then down here, I just have some stuff about how tall the players are and then what positions the Aztecs are deepest at, type of thing. So that's the first screen. This next screen is going to take the longest to talk about, so bear with me. If you already understand how this screen works, you've been following me for a little while, then feel free to skip on to the next one or whatever else you might need help understanding. This sheet is the scheme design sheet, and it's a way to be able to more objectively measure how well somebody's offense is designed. So it's supposed to take out the effects that the talent of the players on the team might have. This just looks at how well the offense is designed. It's pure X's and O's type stuff. I took this rating format from Crandus McBasketball. If you've been following me for a while, you've heard me bring him up before. He does a lot of just data analysis and stuff on Twitter. He's a big-time Laker fan, so if you also like the Lakers, I recommend giving him a follow. But the basic idea was his. I did edit it somewhat to make it fit me more, make it seem easier to understand and easier for me to work with. But let's get into it. So up top, obviously, you have the season you're looking at, the team you're looking at, and then the last day that I actually looked at this stuff. So I'm hoping to update this a couple times throughout the season, but if I'm not seeing anything new, there won't be any point to update it. So there's that. The grade overall is broken down into a couple categories. First, you have set plays, freelance motion, baseline out of bounds, sideline out of bounds, and the secondary break. And you can see these are all given a different level of importance in the overall grade based off of how often they're used. You don't get a whole lot of baseline out of bounds plays, but you have a whole lot of set plays. So the set plays are obviously going to be worth more. As we scroll over, you can see the actual things that I'm looking for in order to determine if a team gets a good grade or not. And you can see it's done kind of like a rubric, and the goal of this is to take out some of the subjectivity of it. There's always going to be some subjective things when it comes to grading, but this should hopefully make it easier and for both for me and for everyone else to understand. So we'll start with the half-court set plays. The first thing I'm looking for is creativity, which just means are the plays that you're running something that everybody else is also doing, or is it something new that hasn't really been done before? Or at the very least hasn't been done in a while, right? So that one, I mean, creativity is one of the more subjective ones. Next, we're looking at action variety, which is the amount of different actions that are used in a given play. So if you have a play that has somebody running off of a flare screen and somebody else coming off of an elevator screen and somebody else doing a split cut, or a couple other people doing a split cut, not all necessarily at the same time, but at different times throughout the play. Those are 3 different actions, so that would be high action variety. You got a bunch of different types of things going on that the defense has to be watching for. Action volume is similar, but it's not the same thing. So it's just the amount of actions. So they don't necessarily have to be different. So if in a single play, the team runs 3 different flare screens, for example, you're going to have 2 or more actions, and so you would get a high grade for this. But because they're all the same action, there would be very little variety, so you'd get a bad grade for action variety. So this is just the actual number of actions that are run, whereas this is the number of different types of actions that are run. What I'm looking for when I look at synergistic action is, do the actions you use feed off of each other? And what I mean by that is, when you do one action, you're expecting the defense to defend it in a certain way. Does the next action that flows off of that use the setup of that first action to make it even more effective? So you're expecting the defense to do one thing, and then the next action is designed specifically to attack that thing that the defense just did. It's kind of hard to explain without any video. I don't have any great video right now that would explain it, but hopefully later I can do a video that explains the concept a little bit better. The last thing is scoring opportunities, and that's just how many times does the play you have a chance to attack the basket, whether it's attacking the basket in a literal sense like in a layup, or whether it's with a wide open jump shot. I consider that attacking the basket as well for the purposes of this rubric. So if you have seen my stagger down video, you saw that one of the things I liked about the play was it has the potential for multiple attacks at the basket. There are 2 on the right side of the play alone during the handoff, and then there's another couple once the play on the left side starts to get going. So it has, like, I think a total of 5 or 6 different attacks on the basket, all within the span of a few seconds. And the more attacks on the basket an offense can generate, the harder it is to defend. So if you have a lot of attacks, you get a good grade. If the play is designed just to get one shot at the very end, so you do a whole bunch of running around and setting up, and it's just for one shot, and then it's easy to cover that shot if you know that that's the only chance they have to attack. So if it just has one, it's a lower grade. Moving on, we come down to freelance motion. Freelance motion is a little less formal than the set plays. It's more concepts that you use within your offense to make the set plays more effective, if that makes sense. So we'll look at a couple of these things. First category is lifts and fades. And this is really simple. All it is, if you can picture a pick and roll happening at the top of the key. So you have, let's say, Devin Watson at the top of the key. Nolan Rain comes and sets a screen for him to the right side. As Devin Watson comes off that screen and heads toward the basket, and Nolan Rain rolls towards the basket, if there's a player in the right side corner, that player needs to move up to the wing because that'll increase spacing. That's called a lift. A fade is the opposite. So if you're on the weak side wing as the pick and roll is happening, you need to kind of fade out towards the corner. And that way it creates a good corner 3-point shot opportunity off the pick and roll. Weak side action is just, are there any actions happening on the side of the court that the ball isn't on? So if Matt Mitchell has the ball on the offense's right side of the court, is anything happening on the left side of the court? Are there any screens? Are there any cuts? Are there anything like that? Action for screener. Is the screener coming off of a screen before he needs to set the screen? Is he doing something after he sets the screen? This grade only affects the pick and roll freelance rating, which is why it says P&R only. But an example of this would be if Devin Watson's at the top of the key and Nolan Narain is down in the low block. Before he comes up and sets a screen for Devin Watson, does Matt Mitchell or Jalen McDaniels come and set a screen on Nolan's guy? That way Nolan is free, his defender's out of position for when the pick and roll between Nolan and Devin Watson starts. That's just one example of a way to do it. If things like that happen a lot, you get a good grade. If it never happens, you get a bad grade. Basket cuts are really simple. It's just, are you making a cut to the basket? Normally you see this in back cuts, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a back cut. The Aztecs are pretty good at basket cuts actually, because they try to cut to the basket when they think a shot's about to go up so that they can get the offensive rebound. And then the last one is split cuts. And split cuts are another thing that's hard to describe just by talking. It would be better to have video. There are some good videos on the internet, and I encourage you to look up split cuts on YouTube or on Google or whatever to get a good idea of how they work. But it's an action that you run out of the post, and I'll do my best to explain it really quick. How it works is normally you will have a player with the ball at one elbow. So let's say the player with the ball is at the right side elbow. What you will then do is have two players kind of run at each other towards the left elbow, and they're trying to make it look like they're both about to go set a screen. That way each of their players is getting ready to go over or under or whatever their defense calls for. And then at the last second, rather than screening, one of the players will cut towards the basket and the other one will cut out towards the three-point line. And the goal is that at least one of the defenders will be confused. Maybe they'll both go for the same player, and either the basket cut or the fade out to the three-point line will be open. So that's how a split cut works. That's only for the post, so if that happens a lot, you get a good grade for split cuts. Moving on, we have the secondary break. The secondary break can be hard to quantify and see sometimes in real time. It's just the weird area in between the actual transition, the actual fast break, and when your half-court offense actually starts. So there's a small amount of time in there where everybody's kind of on the same side of the floor, but the defense isn't quite fully set yet, and that's where the secondary break comes in. And so the secondary break grading system is a lot simpler than the other two because it doesn't happen as often, but we're looking for a lot of the same types of things. So if you want a good grade at the secondary break, are your actions creative? Are there a lot of them? Do you have multiple attacks on the basket? That type of thing. For an average grade, if you have just one action, like a drag screen or a pin screen, you get an average grade. If you don't have any type of secondary break, you get a bad grade. Moving on from that, we got the baseline out of bounds and the sideline out of bounds plays. That's what blob and slob stand for. And these are both graded the same way. They're very similar. They just start at different parts of the court. The Aztecs tend to do baseline out of bounds plays a lot, and they actually have some pretty good ones. At least last season, they always ran baseline out of bounds out of a box set. So they'd have one player out of bounds, normally under the basket, but not necessarily under the basket. And then the other four players inbounds, two at the low blocks, and then two at the elbows. So it's a box set. And they like to run all their plays out of the box set because it makes it harder to scout. If every play looks the same at the beginning, the defense isn't sure which one is coming. So that's really good for them. They got a good play a good grade out of their blob plays last season. but we're looking for the same things, right? So how many attacks at the basket do you have? How creative are the actions? If you just have one action, if you just have a guy running off of a screen to try and get a layup, that's the only scoring opportunity, you're not going to get as good of a grade. If you have a couple different screens going on and a couple different options for the guy to inbound the ball to, then you have multiple scoring opportunities, you're looking good. I think the Aztecs got a 3 last year in this grading system. Slob plays, same exact grading system. Last year, the Aztecs didn't run a single sideline out of bounds play, at least not one that I remember seeing in all the tape that I've watched. So last year they got a 1 for this. I'm expecting that to be the same this year with all the same coaches and everything like that. But that is how the scheme design page works. Once all the grades are input here, they come out here, and then you get an overall grade, and it translates to a grade like you would see at school, so like A+, A-, C+, whatever the grade might be, just to make it easier to understand. So there's that. Let's move on to the next one. The next sheet is the player heat tracker. If you've been following me for a while, you saw me work on this a little bit last season. I started it around the time of the conference tournament, and I thought it was a good idea, and so I'm keeping up with it again this season. It looks a little bit different, but that is because I believe this way will be a little bit easier to understand and easier to work with. What it does is this sheet tracks the rolling averages of each of the team's players for a couple different things. So we have 3-point shooting up here at the top, and then 2-point shooting right under that, every player's name that's active this season, and then up here we have free throws. This is their free throw percentage. On the left side we have the games that we're looking at. So the first is games 1 through 10. So this is a 10-game average. Once the 11th game is played, what will happen is the first game will drop off. It'll be cut off from the time period that we're looking at, and then the 11th game will be added. So every one of these boxes only looks at 10 games, but we're looking at them one after another, all the way throughout the entire season. And what this does is it gives you a little bit clearer picture of who's shooting well and who isn't. So, for example, there might be a player that starts off the season really hot or maybe really cold. It doesn't really matter. And then they start off we'll just go with hot. They start off so hot that later in the season they start to miss shots, but they started off so hot, they hit so many shots to begin the season that their percentage over the course of the season isn't affected that much. So over the course of the season, they're still shooting 37, 38% from 3. But what happened was over the first 10 to 12 games, they were on fire, and then since then they've been putting up bricks. This type of thing will help you see that, and it helps you actually see a better picture of how good a shooter is. It's a way to keep the sample size small enough that you can see how a player is performing right now, while also keeping it big enough that it helps mitigate the effects of luck a little bit. So that's how the player heat tracker works. Once again, every player for 3-point shooting, 2-point shooting, and free throws. The next sheet to look at is the Mountain West heat tracker. And this sheet works very similar to the heat tracker, but instead of tracking individual players, I'm tracking the entire team average, and I'm tracking a couple different things that I am on the player heat tracker. So to start off, we have 3-point percentage once again, and under that you can see all the teams in the Mountain West. Moving on, we have 2-point percentage still. This is where stuff starts to get different. I have offensive rating. Just in case you don't know what offensive rating is, it is the amount of points a team scores per 100 possessions. So it's a little bit of a better way to look at how good an offense is as opposed to points per game, because points per game can be affected by the pace a team plays at. If a team has more possessions, they're probably going to score more points. This gives everybody the same amount of possessions and then spits out one number. So it helps level the playing field a little bit. After that, we have defensive rating, which is the same thing as offensive rating, but on the defensive side of the ball. So this measures how many points a team gives up per 100 possessions. In this way, playing slow doesn't help a team's defense. If you look at it at a points per game level, playing slow will really help a team's defense and could make a team look better than they actually are. Whereas in this case, every team gets 100 possessions, so it's all equaled out. The last thing is the net rating, which all the net rating is you take the offensive rating, subtract the defensive rating from it, and that gives you a net rating. The higher your net rating is, the better, obviously. Once again, on the left side, we have games 1 through 10, and then 2 through 11, and 3 through 12. So what you want to be seeing with these, once again, the 3-point percentage and the 2-point percentage work the same way as it would with the players. So if a team starts out shooting really hot as a whole team and then cools off later, this will show it better than just an average for the whole season would. And vice versa. If a team starts off shooting really cold and then heats up as the year goes on, you'll see that here better than you would anywhere else. What you want to see with the ratings specifically is you want to see the offensive rating going up and the defensive rating going down as the season goes on, because that will show you that the team is actually slowly improving. And it's not going to be perfect, because if a team is playing a bunch of not very good opponents at the beginning and then later in the year they start playing really tough teams, you might not see that effect. Even if it's happening, it might not be shown here, but ideally you want to see, as the team gets better and as the players get better over the course of the year, you want to see the offensive rating going up and the defensive rating going down. It's just a matter of, you don't need to panic if that's not happening. There could be other factors, and that's where we have to use the analysis skills. The numbers are just a tool. But that does it for the Mountain West Heat Tracker. The next page is the Hustle Stats page, and this is a page that I'm really excited about, but it's probably also going to take the most work on my part. I took this idea from the NBA, actually. They started tracking Hustle Stats a couple years ago, and they have very fancy cameras in all their arenas that help them track these types of things, and college arenas don't have those cameras, and even if they did, I couldn't track these things. They would have to put it out on their website or something, and they don't have the cameras, so they don't do it. The NBA tracks like 8 to 10 different hustle stats. The way I have to do this is I'm going to have to watch the game and rewatch the game and just notice when I see these things and count it down and be looking for these things specifically as I'm watching. So it's going to take a good amount of time to do all these things. It's possible that by the end of the year I'll have to stop doing it because it's just taking too much time. But I'm hopeful that I can be able to do this, because I think it could provide some pretty cool insight. The 3 stats that I will be tracking this year are 1, deflections, which is just any time the other team makes a pass and it gets deflected by a player. So, for example, if Devin Watson is guarding somebody and that person somebody makes a pass, it doesn't have to be Watson's guy, but somebody makes a pass and Devin Watson gets his hand on it and then the ball goes out of bounds, that's a pass deflection, so Watson would get not a tick, but I'd write down 1 because it happened 1 time in that game. If it happens 5 times in that game, I'll put a 5 there. So that's deflections. Screen assists are really cool. Screen assists are probably my favorite hustle stat. What a screen assist is if you as a player set a screen that leads to somebody else scoring, you get a screen assist. So the easiest way to picture this is if Nolan Rain comes up to the top of the key and sets a screen for Devin Watson, and Devin Watson comes off the screen and hits a layup or a pull-up jumper or whatever, Nolan Rain would get the screen assist. So I'm hoping to see a lot of screen assist from Narain ideally, but I mean from everybody really, because I just like them. But it's a good way to measure the value of a player on offense who doesn't often score a whole lot. You see players in the NBA such as Rudy Gobert on the Jazz or Steven Adams on the Thunder get a lot of screen assists. So even though they aren't scoring a whole lot, they're still causing a lot of havoc for the opposing team's defense, and it provides a lot of value. And then the last category I'm looking at is charges drawn. And this is very simple. It's just if a player successfully draws a charge, then it gets counted. It's not like a charge rate. I'm not measuring how many charges they draw versus how many charges they attempt to draw, because that would take even more work and it's just too much. But so if a player is drawing a lot of charges, they're going to have a high number here. Once again, at the top, we have every player that's active this year. And then at the bottom, I'll have totals for the season as well as their per game average. And just because I don't think I've mentioned it so far yet, there's a lot of error messages in these sheets right now, and it's just because I don't have any data to put in because the season hasn't started. So once the season starts and I'm able to start putting in some data, all these numbers will change and these sheets will look a lot cleaner. So that is the Hustle Stats page. The last sheet that we will look at for this video is my plus minus sheet, which is a little misleading because it doesn't just track the plus minus of the players, but we'll get into that in just a second here. So once again, really quickly, just to look, we have at the top the names of all the players that are active this season all the way across, and then on the left side, all the games that'll be played this season. So what these different categories are, let's go through them one at a time. First, we have the plus minus, and the way I'm going to be tracking the plus minus is going to be through another sheet that I'm going to do in a different video. But just in case you don't know what plus minus is a measurement of how well a team scored while a certain player was on the court. So, for example, if we have Devin Watson is on the court, and while he's on the court, the Aztecs outscored whatever team they were playing against by 8 points in all the time he was on the court, then he would have a plus minus of 8. Similarly, if Watson is on the court and the Aztecs get outscored by, 5 points, then he would have a plus minus of -5. So it's how well your team scores relative to the other team while this player is on the court. It's a impact stat, so it's looking at the actual impact a player has. It does have its faults because a player might not be doing a whole lot, but because they're playing with a bunch of other really good players, they have a really good plus minus. But at the very least, it's a starting point. From there, we move to points on offense. And what this is going to measure is how many points the Aztecs scored while Devin Watson was on the floor. It's not comparing it to how many points the other team scored like plus minus does. This is just while Devin Watson was on the floor over the course of a game. If the team scored 40 points while he's on the floor, then he would have a 40 right here for points on offense. Points off is how many points the team scores while Devin Watson is sitting on the bench. So if while Watson is sitting on the bench, the team scores 20 points, this number will be a 20. And so what these do is these are the on-off numbers, the on-off splits here. So you can see what this does is it helps you see how much a player is actually helping their team on offense. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. Defense works the same way. So points on defense, this is how many points the team allowed while Devin Watson was on the floor. Points off is how many points the team allowed while Devin Watson was sitting on the bench. I have their minutes right here. This is just how many minutes they played. Really simple. And then their estimated possessions. And how this works is not the best way to do it, admittedly, but it's a way to do it that makes sense to me. It's the easiest way I can think of doing it. A lot of advanced analytics people have different ways of measuring how many possessions a team has and how many possessions a player has and all these different types of things. And they work pretty well overall. They're a little bit too complicated for me, and I just wanted an estimate of how many possessions this player was on the floor for. So not how many possessions this player uses, but how many possessions this player is on the floor for. And so how I'm doing it is I'm taking the possessions for the team as a whole and then dividing that by the amount of time the player was on the floor for, basically. And you can see the formula that I'm using right up here. So this part is the total team possessions. This is the minutes the player was on the floor for, and then divided by 40. So this will spit out a percentage, and then it's just going to assume that the player was on the floor for that percentage of the possessions. So it'll spit out a whole number. It's not the best way to do it because it assumes that the game is being played at the same pace the entire time, which is never going to be the case, but it should be close enough to give us something to work with. So that is all these numbers, and once again I'll be doing this for every player on the team. This is another thing that might prove to be too much work in the end, but I'm going to try it and see how it goes. At the bottom is where we see all these numbers come together. So down here, the plus minus for the player, now the players are on the left hand side of the screen just in case you didn't notice. Down here the plus minus is their total plus minus for the season. So if after 3 games, Devin Watson had plus minus scores of +5, -3, and +3, his total plus minus for the season would be +5 because you have 5, subtract 3, add 3, and you get 5. So this is the total for the entire season. The next category is on offensive rating, which is just the offensive rating the player had while they were on the floor. And this is why it's important for me to know how many possessions they were on the floor for. That's what I'm using that number for, is down here. So this is the offensive rating while the player's on the floor, and the next one is the offensive rating while the player is off the floor. So this is where we're truly going to see over the course of a season, because this is going to be updated after, maybe not after every game, but hopefully every week or two, we'll be able to see if a player is really helping on offense or not. So you have their offensive rating while the team is on the floor, or sorry, the team's offensive rating while the player's on the floor, the team's offensive rating while the player's off the floor, and then the net offensive rating. So this is going to be the easiest way to look at it. This is just if the number is positive, the player is helping out the team's offense overall. And then next to that, you have the defensive rating, works the same way. So this is how many points the team allows while the player is on the floor, how many points the team allows while the player is off the floor, and then the net. So this is where you see if the player is helping out the team's defense. And then after that, here is just the net offensive rating again, the net defensive rating again, and then their overall net rating. So this is where you can see even if a player is helping on offense but not helping on defense, if the help overall is positive or negative, if one is worth more than the other for that specific player. So if the team is scoring 10 more points per 100 possessions when the player is on the floor, but giving up 5 more points per 100 possessions while the player is on the floor, the net would be 5 points per 100 possessions. So that player would still be a positive even though their defense isn't super great. That's how I expect Devin Watson to look this season. He'll have a good offensive rating. The defensive rating won't be super high, but the offense will more than make up for it, so his net rating will be good. That is the plus minus sheet. That does it for this one. I have a couple more videos I'm going to be doing about some of the stuff I'm tracking. The next video will be my POE tracker. If you don't know what POE is, make sure to check out the next video. If you'd like to support the work that I do, or if you'd like to join the movement for more thoughtful, quality, localized sports coverage, please click on the Patreon link in the description.